Hello, hello, everybody. Hope you're having an excellent summer. Let's get started. Chapter 12 The Third Law. The Quadrant Number 4 extruder station was less than 10 minutes from the sealed room, with Wooler moving the emergency van along at the top possible speed that still allowed a safety margin for his passengers. Derek watched the city speed past, its full-blown dance of thoughtless progress still continuing despite the gathering darkness, despite the fact that its course was suicidal. He feared for the city. He feared for Catherine, or whatever her name was. She was going for the key, he was certain of that, trying to take herself out of the situation in the only way she knew how. He didn't expect that the key would do her much good, but he could hardly blame her for trying. What frightened him was the danger she was exposing herself to by trying for the key in the rain. He would have gone after her alone, but having experienced the destructive power of Robot City's weather, he knew he'd be no help at all in a storm. Only a robot would have a chance. Wheeler jerked them to a stop before the extruder station entrance, a series of low, wide buildings constructing themselves from ground level. There was no robotic activity here now. No unloading of trucks. All had taken shelter from the impending storm. "You think she's going to the compass tower?" Ruler asked. "I'm sure of it. She may have had time before the storm to get inside to safety." Tarek looked at him, then reached out and put a hand on his shiny gold arm. "She's not going inside," he said. "She'll be trying to climb the pyramid." "But why?" "We hid something there, something she's trying to retrieve." "I must go," Wheeler said without hesitation. "She'll be killed." "What will the rain do to you?" Derek asked as he climbed out of the van. "Rain in ordinary amounts won't do anything," the robot replied. "The city rain could force its way through my plating in 1,000 different places and make its way into my electrical system. The limits of the damage at that point are a matter of imaginative speculation." "I don't know what to tell you," Derek said. "If you don't go, Catherine will die," the robot finished. "You can tell me nothing. My duty is self-evident. Goodbye, Derek." Wheeler looked back once to make sure the witnesses were off the van, then hurried off at a pace that didn't include the safety margin he had preserved with Derek in the cab. "Come with me," Derek told the witnesses, and moved toward the now closed entrance to the underground. Despite his fears for Catherine's safety, he had things to do. With its explanation of the murder and its connection to the city defenses, backed up totally by Rex's witness testimony, there was no doubt that he'd at least be able to get into the core and stop the replication. That wouldn't stop tonight's rain, however, or even future rains for a time, but it was a start. He opened the outside door, then hurried inside, going down the stairs to the now deserted holding area and its bank of elevators. This wasn't the same extruder station he'd been in previously, but it was set up exactly the same. He walked quickly to the same elevator he had taken with Avernus when he had gone underground. He got inside with the witnesses and pushed the down arrow. The lift began its long journey to the caverns below. The elevator opened into the bustling cavern where the work of building Robot City continued unabated. There wasn't a supervisor in sight, however. There seemed to be activity at one of the dark and unused mine tunnels at the west end of the cavern. He began to move into the flow, then stopped, steeling himself. "Deliberation," Avernus had said. As he stood on the edge of the activity, a long tram sped past him at 100 kilometers an hour, passing within a few centimeters, his hair being pulled by its suction. Deliberation. It was the only way. "Stay with me," he told the witnesses. Then he set his body in a line with his goal and shut his eyes, taking a blind step into the fray. He walked quickly, without hesitation, trying to direct his mind away from the feel of rushing robots and vehicles that barely brushed him as they hurried past. Occasionally he would open his eyes a touch, just to make sure he was still heading in the right direction. Then he'd squeeze them closed again and keep walking. He kept this up for nearly 10 minutes as he crossed the great cavern without mishap. As he reached the safety of the mine entrance, he released a huge sigh that made him feel as if he'd been holding his breath the whole time. A utility robot was stationed near the mine entrance, using an overhead pulley system to remove the spent batteries from a fleet of mine trams and replacing them with charged batteries. The trams were parked 3 deep all around him. "Robot," Derek called across the cars to him, "where can I find Supervisor Furnace?" The utility robot pointed down the tunnel. "They are releasing some of the reservoir water into the abandoned tunnels. It may be dangerous for humans." "Thanks," Derek said, then pointed to a tram. "Has this one been recharged?" "Yes," the robot answered. "Thanks again," Derek said, and climbed behind the steering mechanism. "Wreck, Eve, get in." As the robots climbed into the back of the tram, the utility called to Derek. "Did you not hear me? It may be dangerous for humans in there." "Thanks," Derek said again, waving, then keyed on the electric hum and geared the car down the dark tunnel. As he sped down the tunnels, marking distance by counting the small red lights spaced along the length, he passed other trams full of robots going the other way. They were uniformly dirty from digging, many of them dangling shorted out appendages. Even for robots they appeared grim. One tram they passed carried a robot shorting from the head, sparks arcing from his photocells and speaker. He drove for several kilometers, climbing gently upward the tunnel. Finally he approached a large egg of light that threw long shadows against the rough-hewn walls. When he reached the place he found a large number of utility robots, plus 6 of the 7 supervisors gathered around a drop-off in the tunnel. He jumped from the tram and pushed his way through the crowd to approach the drop-off. It was the same area in which the robots had been digging the day before, only approached from the other side. A subsidiary tunnel going upward had been dug by hand, and it met the existing tunnel which had been trenched out to carry water. The trench was empty. Euler and Rydberg were leaning out over the trench, looking up the newly dug tunnel, while Avernus sorted out those robots damaged beyond usefulness here, and sent them back down the tunnel. Derek moved up to Euler. "I solved the murder," he told the supervisor without preamble. Both Rydberg and Euler turned to look at him. "What was the cause?" Rydberg said. "Carbon monoxide poisoning," Derek said. "When they tried to torch David out of the sealed room, carbon monoxide was released by the heating process into the enclosed space." "It was all our fault then," Euler said. "It was an unfortunate accident," Derek replied, "and I have witnesses." Both Eve and Rex hurried to join him. "2 minutes," Dante called. The small robot was fiddling with a terminal hookup in the back of a tram, his long digits moving with incredible speed over the keyboard. "2 minutes until what?" Derek asked. "Until the charge we placed by the reservoir wall brings the water down," Euler replied. "I also know why the city is on security alert," Derek said. "It was because of David's blood. When he cut himself, the blood that dropped on the city robot was mistaken for an alien presence because of the blood organisms. My witnesses will also corroborate that fact." Euler spoke up. "Then we need to feed this information to the Central Core and stop the replication, if there's time." "What do you mean, if there's time?" Derek asked. Avernus joined the group. "We found a cavern that would hold all the water in the reservoir, thanks to your sonogram. Unfortunately, it'll take a great deal of digging to reach it." Avernus pointed to the trench. "This diversion will do no more than put off the inevitable for 1 more day. Then, instead of overflowing above, the water will overflow below, here in the tunnels." "Where's the Central Core?" Derek asked. "If we can get to it and stop the replication, then we can use the digging machines to turn the trick before the next day's rain." Avernus turned to Dante, looking at him over the heads of the other robots. "Where's the core now?" he called loudly. The little robot's digits flew over the keys while Euler spoke. "Even with the machines, we'd have to start digging almost immediately to reach the cavern in time." "The core is in tunnel J33 at the moment," Dante called, "moving south by southwest at 10 kilometers per hour." He hesitated briefly, then added, 20 centads. Avernus turned abruptly from them all. "That is too bad," he said. "What do you mean, too bad?" Derek asked. All at once there was a rumble that shook the tunnel, dust and loose pebbles falling atop them. Derek nearly lost his footing on the quaking ground. Within seconds a loud roar filled the mines, growing in intensity with each passing second. "It is too bad," Euler said loudly above the roar, "because the Central Core is in Tunnel J33 on the wrong side of the trench, and the rains are beginning outside." With that, tons of waters came rushing down the new tunnel, slamming and fury into the trench below, churning, frothy white, dangerous and untamed. Derek watched in horrified fascination as his only possible route to the central core disappeared under a raging river that hadn't been there a second before. Catherine's mind was as dark as the clouds overhead as her tram hurried through the streets of Robot City in the direction of the Tempest Tower. "I fear we won't make the tower before the rain comes," the utility driver told her. "We must take shelter." "No," she said, determined that she'd keep them from taking away her last ounce of free will. "Go on. Hurry!" "It is not safe for you out here," the robot insisted. "I cannot in all conscience take you any farther." Catherine began to respond with anger, but feared it would arouse the robot's suspicions. "All right," she said. "Pull over at the next building." "Very good," the robot replied, and brought the tram to an immediate stop before a tall building that had the words "Museum of Art" embossed in metal above the doors. The robot got out of the tram and took Catherine by the arm to guide her. "This way, please," he said, and Catherine began to think. The robots have been having meeting about human duplicity. She allowed the robot to lead her into the confines of the building. "This is Supervisor Arian's project," he said, "to please our human inhabitants." She looked around, taking note that the robot had used the word inhabitant instead of visitors. It merely confirmed what she already knew to be the case. They weren't going to let her go. They had no intention of letting her go. The robots needed someone to serve, and they'd keep the masters as slaves just to see that it came to be. The first floor of the museum was full of geometric sculptures, many of them made from city material that moved through its own sequences, constantly changing shapes in an infinite variety of patterns. After a moment she asked, "Please, is it possible to contact Derek and tell him where we are? I'm afraid he'll worry." "There should be a terminal in the curator's office," the robot replied. "Would you like me to do it for you?" "Yes, please. I'd be most grateful." The robot hurried off immediately. As soon as he was out of sight at the far end of the building, Catherine turned and ran. She got quickly out the front doors and down the short walk to the tram, taking the driver's position. It started up easily and she was off. She had no idea of which streets to take to get on to the pyramid, but its size made it a beacon. She simply kept moving toward it. She concentrated on planning as she drove. The rain was very close now and she didn't want to get caught in it, but it was worth to try to get out of the city. Derek had said there was a trap door from the office to the platform atop the structure. She'd go through the inside of the pyramid, then, to reach the top. The key was hidden part way down the outside of the structure, and it would be far easier and faster to climb down from the top than to climb up. The sky rumbled loudly as she drove. The wind whipped her long hair around her face. She was cold, but put it out of her mind as she concentrated on her objective. Why did he have to do it to her? Why did he have to go over to the other side? The city had become Derek's obsession. He apparently couldn't understand that she had to have freedom, that she couldn't live within its structure forever. The pyramid loomed large before her. It lit up brightly as a bolt of lightning ran down its face. She skidded to a stop before it and jumped out of the tram, hearing a noise behind her. There, 2 blocks distant, the robot that called itself Ruler was hurrying to intercept her. She turned and ran up to the entry. The city material melted away at her approach to allow her inside. Once inside, she had no idea of where she was going. The only thing she remembered for sure was that she needed to keep going up. She ran the maze-like halls, taking every opportunity to climb the stairs or take an elevator that would put her up higher. About halfway up the structure she heard an announcement over unseen loudspeakers that called attention to her flight and gave instructions for her apprehension. At that she doubled her pace, going full out. Her only hope of escaping was to reach the safety of the off-limits zone before she was spotted. She hurried unseen down the now shortened hallways, reaching the last elevator up. A tech robot with welder arms spotted her as she hurried inside. Heart pounding, she stabbed at the air and the machine sped her quickly to the upper floor. The door slid open and she burst through, running immediately. There were voices behind her, calling her by name. She turned a corner and ran up a short ramp and burst into the off-limits hallway just as the robots behind were closing on her. She ran to the door leading up to the office, her hand going to the power stud. "Katherine!" She recognized Wooler's voice and turned to face him. He stood, a hallway full of robots behind him, at the edge of the off-limit zone, the same place the witnesses had stopped earlier in the day. "What do you want?" she asked. "Come away from there. This place is off-limits." She smiled. "Not to me," she said. "I'm human, remember? I'm free, and I'm going to be freer." "Please do not go outside," Wooler said. "The rains are beginning. It could be dangerous for you." "You're not going to keep me here," she said, opening the door that faced the spiral staircase. "We would love to have you stay with us," the robot said, "but we would never keep you here against your will." "Then why don't you have the means on planet for me to leave or call for help?" "You act as if we brought you here under false pretenses," Wooler said. "We did nothing. You came here uninvited. Welcome, but uninvited. Our civilization is not developed to the point where planetary interaction is possible. You can see that for yourself." "We're wasting time," Katherine said, and started through the door. "Please reconsider," the robot called. "Don't put yourself in jeopardy." She stared hard at him. "I've been in jeopardy every second I've been in this crazy place." With that she moved through the door, closing it behind her. She took the stairs quickly and entered the office. The angry clouds rolled up close to the viewers, making it seem as if she were standing in the midst of the gathering storm. Searching the office, she found the ladder easily enough, climbing it to reach the windy platform above. The wind was so strong that she feared getting to her feet, and crawled to the edge where she and Derek had made their first treacherous descent into the city of robots. For the first time since being freed from the sealed room, her fears began to overcome her anger at the situation as she turned her body to edge herself off the dizzying height to begin her climb downward. The wind pulled viciously like at her like cold, prying fingers. Her eyes and nose went numb, and her fingers tingled with the cold. Though the pyramid was made from the same material as the rest of the city, it wasn't the same in any other respect. It was rigid and unbending, its face set with platforms of holes that she and Derek had used as hands and footholds previously, and in which they'd hidden the key on their first descent. Her mind whirled as she climbed, slowly, so slowly. How far down had it been? She had been moving fast, and Derek, carrying the key, had been unable to keep up. They had stopped for a conference and decided the height of the key and continue without it. How far down? A fourth of the climb, barely a fourth, in the leftmost hole of the pattern that ran down the center of the structure. She continued downward, her fingers hurting now, her eyes looking upward, trying to gauge her distance just right. She began testing the holes in the repeated pattern to no avail. She still hadn't reached the place. Something wet and cold hit her on the back. Her hands almost pulled out of their holds reflexively. It was a raindrop, and it wet the entire back of her one piece. She was running out of time. The pattern of holes repeated again as she inched downward, and when she looked up, squinting against the frigid wind, she knew she had reached the place. Hugging the pyramid with the last of her strength, she slowly reached out, sticking her hand into the leftmost hole of the pattern. The key was gone. "No!" she screamed loudly into the teeth of the monster, and, as if in response, the rain tore from the heavens in blinding, bludgeoning sheets to silence her protest. Derek stood at the exit to the extruder station, and listened to the rain pounding against the door, and watched the small puddle that had made its way under the sealed entry. Katherine was out there somewhere, and Wooler. Nothing had been heard from either of them since before the start of the rain. Avernus had made contact with the compass tower, and though both had been seen there, neither was there now. With the rain controlling the day, everything had come to a standstill, making searching impossible, making contact with the Central Core impossible, making everything except the almighty building project slow to nothing. It was maddening. He pounded the door, his fists sinking in, cushioning. He wanted to open those doors and run into the city and find her for himself, but he knew what that meant. Most likely nothing would be known until the rain abated the next morning. He turned from the door and walked down the stairs to the holding area and the 6 supervisor robots who awaited him there. His mind was awash in anxiety. "Supervisor Rydberg has proposed a plan, friend Derek," Euler said. "Perhaps you will comment on it." Derek looked at Rydberg, trying to bring his mind back to the present. Why did the woman affect him this way? "Let's hear your plan," he said. "We can go ahead and devise our evacuation schedule for the robots working underground," Rydberg said. "It seems that when morning comes you will be able to contact the core and halt the replication. It'll be too late to dig through to the cavern in time, but at least we will have the opportunity to spare our mind workers before the floods." "Why do you have to give up like this?" Derek said, exasperated. "You have heard the reason for the defenses. Can't you just stop them now and use the digging equipment to begin excavating the cavern?" Waldauer, the squat-wheeled supervisor, said, "The Central Core is our master program. We cannot abandon it. Only the Central Core can judge the veracity of your statements and make the final decision." "I'm going to reprogram the Central Core," Derek answered, too loudly. "Going to change its definition of veracity. And besides, the laws of robotics are your master program, and the second law states that you will obey a human command unless it violates the first law. I'm commanding you to halt the mining processes and begin digging through to the drainage cavern." "The defensive procedures were designed by the Central Core to protect the city, which is designed to protect human life," Waldauer replied. "The Central Core must be the determining factor in any decision to abandon the defenses. Though your arguments sound humane, they may, ultimately, be in violation of the first law. For if the Central Core determines that your conclusions are erroneous, then shutting down the defenses could be the most dangerous of all possible decisions." Derek felt as if he were on a treadmill. All argument ultimately led back to the Central Core. And though he was sure that the Central Core would back off once he programmed the information about human blood into it, he had no way to prove to the robots who, in turn, refused to do anything to halt the city's replication until they received that confirmation from Central. Then an idea struck him, an idea so revisionist in its approach that he was frightened at first even to think out its effect on the robots. What he had in mind would either liberate their thinking or send them into a contradictory mental freeze-up that could destroy them. "What do you think of Rydberg's plan?" Avernus asked him. "It'll save a great many robots." Avernus, that was it, Avernus the humanitarian. Derek knew that his idea would destroy the other robots, but Avernus, he was different. Avernus leaned toward the humane, a leaning that could just possibly save himself and the rest of Robot City. "I will comment on the evacuation plan later," Derek said. "First, I'd like to speak with Avernus alone." "We make our decisions together," Euler said. "Why?" Derek asked. "We've always done it that way," Rydberg said. "Not any more," Derek said, his voice hard. "Unless you can give me a second, first law reason why I shouldn't speak with Avernus alone, I will then assume you are violating the laws yourself." Euler walked to the center of the room, then turned slowly to look at Avernus. "We've always done it this way," he said. Avernus, the giant, moved stoically toward Euler, putting a larger pincer on the robot's shoulder. "It wouldn't hurt anything, this once, if we go against our own traditions." "But traditions are the hallmark of civilization," Euler said. "Survival is also one of the hallmarks," Derek replied, looking up at Avernus. "Are you willing?" "Yes," Avernus answered, without hesitation. "We will speak alone." Derek led Avernus to the elevators, then had a thought and returned to Euler. He unwrapped the fabric bandage from his cut arm and handed it to the supervisor. "Have the blood analyzed, the data broken down on a disk I can feed it to the core." "Yes, Derek," Euler said, and it was the first time the supervisor had addressed him without the formal declaration "friend." Maybe they were all growing up a little bit. Derek then joined Avernus in the elevator, pushing the down arrow as the door slid closed. They only traveled down for a moment before Derek pushed the emergency stop button. The machine jerked to a halt. "What is this about?" Avernus asked. "I want to make a deal with you," Derek said. "What sort of deal?" "The lives of your robots for one of your digging machines." Avernus just stared at him. "I don't understand." "I'm talking about the third law of robotics," Derek said. "You are obligated by the third law to protect your own existence, as long as it doesn't interfere with the first or second laws. In your case, for your special programming, I can easily extend the third law to include robots under your control." "Go on." "My deal is a simple one. Rydberg has suggested an evacuation plan that could save the robots in the mines from the flooding that is sure to occur if the cavern is not excavated. That excavation plan depends completely on my reprogramming the central core to help the replication. For if I don't, the city will have to keep replicating, even to its own destruction. That destruction would include the robots who are working underground. I understand that, Avernus said. All right. Derek took a deep breath. What he was getting ready to propose would undoubtedly freeze out the postronics of any of the other robots. The contradictions were too great, the choice too impossible to make. But with Avernus, maybe, just maybe. Unless you give me one of the digging machines so I can begin the excavation myself, I will refuse to reprogram the central core, thereby condemning all your robots to stay underground during the flooding. Avernus's red eyes flared brightly. You would kill so many? I would save your city and your robots, Derek yelled. It's all or nothing. Give me the machine or suffer the consequences. You asked me to deny the central core program that protects the first law. Yes, Derek said simply, his voice quieting. You have got to make the creative leap to save your robots. Somewhere in that brain of yours, you've got to make a value judgment that goes beyond your programming. Avernus just stood there, quaking slightly, and Derek felt tears welling up in his eyes, knowing the torture he was putting the supervisor through. If this failed, if he, in effect, killed Avernus by killing his mind, he'd never be able to forgive himself. The big robot's eyes flashed on and off several times, and suddenly his body shuddered violently, then stopped. Derek heard a sob escape his own lips. Avernus bent to him. You will have your digging machine, the robot told him, and me to help you use it. And thus ends Chapter 12. We only have 2 more chapters left in this book, and then we can get started in the next one. Have a great summer, guys.